Things have been moving fast when it comes to this war, and Canada has just added to that today. Of course, we've had the recent meeting between Putin and Trump in Alaska, as well as the recent visit of Ukraine's Zelensky to the White House, alongside the group of European nations meeting to discuss next steps, of which Canada wasn't involved. But today, Canada's Prime Minister, when visiting Ukraine for their Independence Day ceremony, Prime Minister Carney made a shocking announcement in saying he would not rule out Canadian troops being in Ukraine. Listen to this.
We are working through with our allies in Coalition of the Willing and with Ukraine the modalities of those security guarantees on land, in the air, and the sea, and I would not exclude the presence of troops.
This is a big deal with Canada not ruling out troops being in Ukraine, but I want to make one thing clear, and that this is talking as part of a security guarantee. In other words, this is one of the terms of a potential peace agreement, is these security guarantees for Ukraine. That means that this commitment from Canada, or not ruling out of troops, is in relation to what will happen after there is a peace guarantee, after there is a peace agreement reached. Then we could see Canadian troops in Ukraine to bolster their security moving forward. This isn't a situation where Canadian troops would be immediately fighting as a part of the ongoing conflict. But this does differ from the American point of view. Of course, the Donald Trump campaign was a lot about America first and not being involved in foreign wars, so they're more hesitant to make these types of potential commitments. Here's an interview that J.D. Vance, the vice president, gave just this morning.
For Americans who are watching, can you guarantee no U.S. boots on the ground as a part of these security guarantees?
The president's very clear. There are not going to be boots on the ground in Ukraine, but we are going to continue to play an active role in trying to ensure that the Ukrainians have the security guarantees and the confidence they need to stop the war on their end. And the Russians feel like they can bring the war to a conclusion on their end. It's complicated, Kristen, but we're going to keep on trying to play these parties. We're going to keep on trying to convince these parties to talk to each other and continue to play the game of diplomacy, because that's the only way to get this thing wrapped up.
So Vance says that U.S. troops will not be on the ground if there is a peace agreement in Ukraine as part of these security guarantees. He doesn't rule out other types of support in terms of military support, air support potentially, but he does rule out boots on the ground specifically, which makes you wonder how impactful Canada's commitment of potentially doing a boots on the ground situation really would be. It seems like it would have to be in tandem with many of the other European states. And these talks moving forward might make you think that we're actually pretty close here to getting to a peace agreement, which is ideally what everybody wants, this war to end and the killing to stop. But despite all of the movement, it seems that there have been talks, but that they've ultimately stalled, despite signs that things were looking like we could be working towards peace. And the reason this is stalled primarily has to do with two main issues, both of which the other side has dug their heels in on completely. One of the items that Ukraine says must be a part of any peace agreement is protections, security guarantees. They want something as close to NATO Article 5 protections as possible. If you're not familiar, those Article 5 protections are for any NATO member, of which Ukraine currently is not, and it says that an attack on any of these partner countries should be seen as an attack on all of them, meaning it could trigger a kinetic war if there were an attack. Obviously, Ukraine wants this because it would make them feel like, okay, well, Russia can't invade again in the future. Formerly, Russia said no way to this, and there's no way we can have a peace agreement if this is part of the situation. They say that this is the whole reason they started the war. From what they say, this is their argument, that it is NATO expansion which caused them to feel uneasy about their own security, which caused them to do the invasion. You can make of that what you will. But many European leaders, of course, refute this, saying it was a pure war, only started for territorial gains, and that it had nothing to do with the potential expansion of NATO membership to Ukraine. Now, we thought we were making progress here out of Alaska. It seemed like Russia was starting to have flexibility on security guarantees, meaning they may make a concession here to get to some sort of peace. But recently, Russia's foreign affairs minister, Sergei Lavrov, gave an interview, and he clarified what was actually going on here and said, hey, we're being misrepresented when people are saying that we agree to these security guarantees.
This means that the people admit that they want divisible security, that they want security built for Ukraine, which is being discussed now, but built against Russia. Those discussions, which took place yesterday, before yesterday, after the Washington meeting, they clearly indicate that people see security as only security for Ukraine, and they are prepared to send intervention force, occupying force, to the Ukrainian territory to deter Russia. They don't conceal that this is the goal.
So he says Russia was actually okay with security guarantees, but not in the way that people are framing them now. It's a little bit confusing the way he makes this argument, but let me clarify a little bit. He makes reference to indivisible security guarantees versus divisible security guarantees. That's in reference to this agreement, the Helsinki Accords, that was signed by the Soviet Union in the 70s. It starts the idea about this idea of recognizing the indivisible security in Europe, as well as their common interest in the development of cooperation throughout Europe. And it was further defined in the agreement that was signed in the 70s by the Soviet Union, Europe, as well as the States, called the Paris Charter for a New Europe, where they further went on to define this concept that security guarantees are all well and good for individual countries, but they cannot impact the security of other nations, because any security gains for one country could be seen as a threat to another country. Again, I'm simply explaining what their point of view here is, not making a value judgment about it. So it seems he's making the point that Russia should be involved in Ukrainian security guarantees alongside European nations and maybe the States. And he takes issue with what Mark Carney suggested today, that we could see European or Canadian boots on the ground in Ukraine, because Russia, from his perspective, well, feels like this is a threat to their sovereignty, which, from their perspective, is the whole reason that they started this war, because they see NATO expanding. Like I said, a lot of people have commented on my videos saying, I can't believe you believe this. I'm simply trying to make clear what they're saying so that we can have a better idea of why these negotiations have stalled. From my perspective, it's challenging to see how you can make a point using this concept of indivisible security after going to war with Ukraine, thus impacting its security. But I guess their counter-argument to that would be that it was in response to threats that they felt from a not-so-friendly military alliance planning to move closer and border it. So despite hearing that concessions were made by Russia in terms of this critical issue of security guarantees, Russia would want to be involved in how those security guarantees look, and that's something that much of the West would have a hard time accepting. In that same interview, J.D. Vance was pressed on this very issue.
Foreign Minister Lavrov discussed the importance of Russia being a part of security guarantees. Ukraine says that's a non-starter. Is that a non-starter for the United States as well? How can Russia secure Ukraine when it's dropping bombs on
There's
Ukraine?
a little bit of a talking past each other here. First of all, we're not talking about security guarantees until after the war has come to a close. And of course, the Russians are going to be a part of the conversation about bringing that war to a close. So, of course, they're going to have some stake in this. They're going to talk about this. That doesn't mean that they're going to have troops in Ukrainian territory, but how can you reasonably provide security guarantees without talking to the Russians about what would be necessary to bring the war to a close? So I think there's a little bit of people talking past each other. This is going to be a security guarantee provided by a host of nations. I think the Europeans are obviously going to play a big role. We think there are other countries all over the world that might play a big role. The Russians are going to be involved because they're the critical party that's necessary to stop the killing. Again, this is how negotiations happen. It's this give and take. It's a conversation between both sides.
So he says this doesn't mean Russian troops on the ground in Ukraine is a part of security guarantees, but it also won't mean American troops there. Hey, maybe these European countries can take the ball on this one. And hey, I guess Canada is part of that based on what the Prime Minister Mark Carney said today. Now, the other angle that's led to both sides digging in and the stalling of these peace talks is territorial concessions. Now, after the talks with Trump, Ukraine seemed more willing to make it a territorial concession, possibly giving up some of the land that was claimed by Russia during the war in an effort to bring peace. But it seems that Russia wanted more than Ukraine was willing to give. The Russians, alongside a commitment for Ukraine to not ever join NATO, they also wanted territorial concessions above and beyond the territory that they've even already captured during the war. They want more than that. Back in June 2024, Putin claimed that if they were going to get to peace here, then Ukraine was going to have to give up the entirety of the Donbass region, as well as some southern regions as well. This is interesting because currently Russia controls about 88% of Donbass, which means that they would be asking for this additional 12% as well. Again, this is as of June 2024. But recently, Russia changed their proposal. They didn't say, hey, we'll only take the land that we've claimed during the war. They're saying we still want the final 12% of the Donbass, but we won't worry as much about those southern regions. And maybe you'll agree to that, Ukraine. But despite the talk from the Trump-Zelensky meeting that Ukraine might be willing to give up some land, it seems that giving up additional land that hasn't been gained via the efforts of the war on the Russian side, well, that is out of the question. I'll show you a clip here of Zelensky talking about not gifting land to the occupiers. This is recently said during their flag or their Independence Day.
Свою землю не подаруємо окупанту. Цей прапор символізує найдорожче для сотень тисяч наших воїнів.
So we're filling in the blanks here a little bit, but it sounds like Zelensky may be willing to give up the point where the front lines are today, but that they will not be gifting land. Now, that also could sound like they're not willing to give up any territory, but it seems increasingly like there will not be an end to the war, at least from Russia's perspective and from the US's perspective, unless there is some territorial concessions here, even though obviously nobody really wants that to happen. So these two details, the security guarantees and the territorial concessions, are what have stalled these peace conversations. And now Zelensky is saying that Russia is intentionally trying to stop meetings on peace and prolong war. In that same Lavrov interview that I played the clip from, he was talking about how, well, there actually is no meeting scheduled between Putin and Zelensky. Now, Zelensky says, hey, why won't you meet with me? We want to figure this out and talk. But Lavrov in that interview said that there's no sense in meeting when there's not a clear agenda. In other words, it would just be a meeting for show because they're too far apart on the issues that we just talked about. Why meet when both parties have red lines that are incongruent with the other party's red lines? You know what I mean? So that's where we're at today, and to the best of my knowledge, Canada is the first nation not ruling out putting troops on the ground in Ukraine in the event that there is a peace agreement reached. I found that rather shocking given how far Canada is away, but we are a member of the Coalition of the Willing, the European nations as well as Canada are a part of that, and Mark Carney, in that speech, which was longer than the clip that I showed you, really made the point that this war in Ukraine is very much so something Canadians should be extremely concerned about. Now, people will have different views on that. People saying, hey, why are we involved in this versus, okay, this is the meaningful thing to be involved in. I'm curious what you think about everything we talked about today, the red lines of both Russia and Ukraine, as well as Canada's new increasing role in this entire conversation. Let me know in the comment section below and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. I'll keep on coming out with videos like this, doing my best to make sense of what's going on here and not necessarily take a solid side, but try to understand where both sides are coming from. But with all of that said, thanks so much for watching, everybody. I really hope this video helped you out at least a little bit, and I'll see you next time.